It began with a single message, a ping on a secure device, a note that no one, not even the closest confidants of the royal family, could have anticipated. Markus Anderson, a name that had circulated quietly in the tabloids but had never commanded serious attention, had just done something unthinkable. He had leaked photos. Not just any photos. These were images that would ignite the kind of scandal that reverberates through history. And at the very center of it, Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew. The thought alone seemed impossible, almost absurd, until the proof began surfacing. Imagine hearing that the most closely guarded secrets of the royal family, the very foundation of their public image, were now exposed to the world in the blink of an eye. Harry, the young prince who had already endured years of media scrutiny and betrayal, was blindsided. The very person he had trusted, the person he had relied upon to protect his family from intrusion and humiliation, had failed him. Or perhaps had actively contributed to it. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's take a step back. Why does this matter? Why would the world care about a leak involving Meghan Markle, Prince Andrew, and now Harry's reaction? Because the stakes aren't just personal, they're historical. The British royal family isn't just a family. It's a symbol, an institution, a brand that spans centuries. Every scandal, every revelation has consequences not just for the individuals involved, but for the monarchy itself. And this leak, threatened to destabilize everything. Markus Anderson had carefully timed his release. A calculated move, or perhaps an impulsive act of someone who had grown weary of secrecy. Either way, the timing was perfect, devastatingly perfect. The photos didn't just appear. They arrived at a moment when tension between Meghan and other members of the royal family was already at its peak. Rumors had swirled for months, quiet whispers of disagreements, arguments, and misunderstandings, but nothing on this scale. The images were shocking, yes, but the real shock came in the reactions. Harry's reaction, immediate and visceral, became the centerpiece of the unfolding drama. He had confronted the leaks with disbelief, anger, and a raw vulnerability that the public rarely witnessed. To see a prince, groomed from childhood to maintain composure and discretion, unravel in the face of betrayal, it was captivating, painful, and utterly human. And it forced the world to ask, what happens when personal betrayal collides with public life? Meanwhile, Meghan's reaction was more calculated, more subtle. There was anger, yes, but also a measured defense. Every public appearance, every statement, every social media interaction carried layers of subtext. The world began to scrutinize her every move, looking for clues, inconsistencies, anything that could explain what had happened and why. And Prince Andrew, his involvement added another layer of complexity. A figure already mired in past controversies, now intertwined in a scandal that threatened not only reputations but legacies. But let's not forget Markus Anderson. Why would someone risk everything to leak photos of such magnitude? What was his motivation? Power? Revenge? Fame? Or did he simply believe the public had a right to know what was hidden behind palace walls? His actions, intentional or reckless, set off a chain reaction that no one could have anticipated. The media frenzy alone was a storm of unprecedented scale, with tabloids, social media platforms, and global news outlets spinning every detail, dissecting every pixel of the leaked photos, and speculating about the fallout. The first glimpse of the photos was enough to send shockwaves. They weren't scandalous in the way tabloids often depict affairs. They were intimate, revealing, and yet shrouded in ambiguity. The context was everything, and the interpretations were endless. Some saw betrayal. Others saw a complex web of human relationships, power dynamics, and personal choices. But one thing was clear. The photos had the power to redefine public perception of Meghan, Andrew, and even Harry. Harry's world, already fragile from years of scrutiny, felt the weight of betrayal more acutely than most could imagine. Here was a man whose life had been documented, critiqued, and dissected since birth, suddenly confronted with evidence that someone he knew or trusted had compromised everything. The psychological impact was immediate. Shock, disbelief, a gnawing sense of vulnerability. He was no longer just a prince. He was a man facing betrayal on the largest stage imaginable. The palace, as you might expect, went into overdrive. Security was tightened. Private meetings were called. Legal advisors, PR strategists, and family members convened in closed rooms to discuss containment, damage control, and strategy. But in the world of leaks and instant communication, control is an illusion. Every move, every decision was already being analyzed by millions, broadcasted, dissected, and commented upon. And all of it fed into a narrative that no one inside the palace could fully control. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The photos were only the beginning. What they revealed was a fragment of a much larger story. Hidden alliances, unspoken tensions, and long-standing grievances suddenly became part of the public conversation. It wasn't just about Meghan and Andrew. It was about loyalty, secrecy, and the fragility of relationships under the relentless gaze of the world. The implications were massive, and yet, much of the truth remained veiled, waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to bring it fully into light. And that's where the drama intensifies. Because every scandal has multiple layers, and the most powerful moments are those hidden in plain sight. Each reaction, each statement, each whispered rumor becomes part of a larger puzzle. Harry's silence, Meghan's composure, Andrew's evasions, they're all pieces of a story that refuses to be told in a single breath. The audience is left hanging, desperate to understand, to see the resolution, to witness the fallout firsthand. Imagine sitting in Harry's shoes. The person you trusted, the person you believed had your back, is suddenly the architect of public humiliation. And yet, there's no immediate recourse. No way to undo the damage. No way to retract the photos. No way to control the narrative. All that remains is reaction, swift, strategic, and emotionally charged. And as the world watches, the pressure builds, intensifying every decision, every word, every glance. By the time the photos made headlines globally, the stage was set. The royal family, a centuries-old institution, was thrust into the chaos of modern media, where truth, speculation, and gossip collide. Markus Anderson's leak wasn't just a personal act. It was a cultural event, a phenomenon that would dominate conversations, headlines, and social feeds for weeks, months, perhaps even years. And yet, even amidst the chaos, questions lingered. Why now? Why these photos? Why Markus Anderson? And most importantly, what would happen next? Because in scandals of this magnitude, the first revelation is rarely the final act. There are always surprises, twists, and consequences that no one anticipates until they arrive. And in this story, those consequences were about to hit harder than anyone could imagine. But the first photo, the one that ignited the storm, held a secret that even the most seasoned insiders didn't expect. A detail so subtle, so seemingly insignificant, that it was almost invisible at first glance. Yet it carried the power to unravel narratives, shift perceptions, and leave Harry, Meghan, Andrew, and the public reeling. And as the world prepared to react, one question loomed over everything. How far would the ripple effects reach? How much damage could one leak truly inflict? And here's the part that will make your jaw drop. What came next wasn't just about exposure or embarrassment. It was about power, control, and the unseen forces operating behind palace walls. Every action had a reaction, every revelation a consequence, and every secret a price. Markus Anderson's leak was just the beginning. The dominoes had started falling, and there was no way to stop them. And so we begin. This is not just a story about leaked photos, shocking betrayals, or royal drama. This is a story about trust shattered, secrets exposed, and a family struggling to survive the glare of global scrutiny. And as you watch, you'll start to see the layers unravel, one shocking revelation at a time. The first chapter is about to begin. And believe me, the first photo, the one that started it all, is something no one saw coming. But what it revealed would change the course of everything, and the fallout would be felt by all, especially Harry. It all started with a ping, a notification so ordinary, so deceptively harmless, that no one could have imagined what it would trigger. Markus Anderson's message arrived at an unassuming hour, buried among routine communications, yet it carried a weight that would reverberate far beyond its initial appearance. Within minutes, whispers of the leak spread through the palace corridors, first as rumors, then as urgent discussions behind closed doors. A storm was brewing, and no one, not even Harry, was prepared for it. Markus Anderson was no ordinary name in the tabloid world. To many, he was a shadow, someone who floated at the edges of gossip columns, occasionally making headlines for small, scandal-adjacent revelations. But this time, he had crossed a line. He had acquired something no one thought possible. Photos implicating Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew in a relationship that, until now, had existed only in rumor, innuendo, and palace gossip. The images themselves were incendiary, yet it was the timing and the method of delivery that made them catastrophic. Imagine being Harry in that moment, sitting in the familiar walls of your home, expecting another day of routine, only to have your world tilt on its axis. Shock, disbelief, anger, a cocktail of emotions so intense it is almost impossible to describe. And yet, this was only the beginning. The leak was more than just a breach of privacy. It was a deliberate strike at the heart of the royal family's reputation. Anderson's motives were murky. Was it revenge? Personal gain? Or an obsessive desire to rewrite the narrative that the palace had carefully curated for decades? Analysts and insiders speculated endlessly. Some believed it was a calculated move, designed to maximize media impact and public outrage. Others whispered that Markus was acting out of frustration, a private vendetta against those who had dismissed him as irrelevant. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the leak would not be contained. The photos themselves were initially circulated through private channels, shared with journalists and influencers in a carefully orchestrated manner. But as the digital age has taught us, nothing stays private for long. Within hours, the images were circulating across the internet, appearing on blogs, forums, and social media platforms. Every upload, every screenshot, every forwarded message amplified the scandal exponentially. The palace, despite its security protocols and media management strategies, was powerless to halt the spread. Harry's reaction, when he finally saw the photos, was a mixture of disbelief and raw anger. This was not just about betrayal. It was about exposure. His family, his wife, his role as a protector of his loved ones, all suddenly compromised. He was forced to confront the reality that someone he might have trusted, or at least assumed to be inconsequential, had inserted themselves into the most private corners of his life and made them public. Meanwhile, Meghan's response was subtle but revealing. She moved with caution, aware of the media scrutiny that would inevitably follow. Her statements were measured, each word carefully chosen, each appearance calculated to maintain composure while managing the fallout. Yet beneath the surface, there was tension, an underlying anxiety that even the public's gaze could not fully appreciate. Prince Andrew's involvement added layers of complexity. A figure already scrutinized for past controversies, now caught in a scandal with implications that reached far beyond personal embarrassment. His role in the leak, or at least in the photographs themselves, brought renewed attention to old grievances and unresolved conflicts. The media, ever hungry for sensationalism, immediately drew parallels, connecting dots that may or may not have existed but were compelling enough to capture public imagination. Back at the palace, the immediate response was one of crisis management. Security teams monitored communications, legal advisors assessed potential breaches of privacy laws, and senior family members convened in private to formulate a response. Yet, even in this controlled environment, uncertainty reigned. How should they respond? What could they say without exacerbating the situation? Every potential statement carried risk, every action had consequences. The media frenzy intensified as the first leaks went public. News outlets across the globe picked up the story within hours, creating a firestorm of speculation, analysis, and outright sensationalism. Social media platforms amplified the scandal, with memes, hashtags, and viral commentary dominating feeds worldwide. Public opinion became a volatile battlefield, with factions forming around sympathy, outrage, and curiosity. But what truly made this leak unprecedented was not the scandalous content alone. It was the network of implications it unleashed. Hidden alliances within the royal family were exposed, private disputes were thrust into public view, and the delicate balance of power was destabilized. Harry, Meghan, Andrew. Each had to navigate a rapidly shifting landscape of public perception, private loyalty, and institutional pressure. In the midst of this chaos, Markus Anderson emerged as a figure of intrigue. Who exactly was he, and how did he gain access to materials so sensitive? Rumors circulated. Some suggested insider connections, others hinted at sophisticated cyber capabilities. Yet, the truth remained obscured, adding another layer of mystery to an already explosive situation. His actions were deliberate, strategic, and undeniably impactful. As hours turned into days, the implications of the leak deepened. Conversations that had once been private now echoed publicly. Judgments were made without full context, and reputations hung in the balance. Harry found himself grappling not only with betrayal and anger, but also with the realization that his ability to control the narrative was slipping away. The palace, despite centuries of tradition and protocol, was unprepared for the velocity and scale of modern media exposure. The first photo, the one that triggered everything, became the epicenter of discussion. Its content, seemingly simple at first glance, held subtleties that suggested a narrative far more complex than initial speculation. Observers analyzed body language, expressions, and settings, searching for hidden meanings, clues, and confirmations of long-held suspicions. Every detail was scrutinized, every nuance dissected. But the most striking element of the leak wasn't just the images themselves, it was the emotional resonance. Betrayal, shock, vulnerability. These were not abstract concepts, but lived experiences captured in the reactions of those involved. Harry's anguish, Meghan's composure, Andrew's unease. They were raw, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. And for the public, this humanization of royal figures created a powerful emotional connection, drawing viewers deeper into the unfolding drama. Even as damage control efforts intensified, new questions emerged. What were the motivations behind Markus Anderson's actions? Were there additional leaks yet to surface? Could the palace mitigate the fallout, or was this the beginning of a larger unraveling? Each unanswered question heightened tension, creating a sense of suspense that gripped the global audience. And just as the first wave of shock began to settle, whispers emerged of a second set of images. More intimate, more revealing, and potentially more damaging. The palace braced itself, journalists sharpened their pens, and social media exploded anew. Markus Anderson had demonstrated his reach, his audacity, and his understanding of the dynamics that would make this leak unforgettable. In this moment, Harry's world shifted irreversibly. Trust, already a fragile commodity, was fractured. Personal relationships were tested in real time under the unforgiving scrutiny of public opinion. And as he grappled with these revelations, one truth became clear. Nothing about this leak was ordinary, and nothing about the consequences would be predictable. The photos arrived like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile calm that had briefly settled after Markus Anderson's initial leak. At first glance, they seemed almost ordinary, snapshots of private moments. But it was the context, the subtlety, the implications that sent shockwaves through every corner of the royal family and the public alike. This wasn't mere gossip. This was evidence, and it demanded scrutiny. From the very first moment the photos circulated, their gravity was apparent. They weren't sensationalized images manufactured by the tabloids. They were real, intimate, and damning. They showed Meghan Markle in situations with Prince Andrew that raised uncomfortable questions. Were these mere coincidences, harmless social interactions blown out of proportion, or was there a deeper, darker narrative unfolding behind closed doors? The world was forced to confront the uncomfortable possibility that the polished, carefully curated image of royalty could be flawed, even deeply compromised. Harry's reaction was immediate. Unlike the broader public, he saw the images not as news, but as a personal affront. Shock gave way to a swirling mix of disbelief, confusion, and anger. Every gesture, every glance in the photos seemed to demand a response. But what could he do? The images had been unleashed into the public domain, circulating uncontrollably, and yet he had no control over the narrative that would inevitably form around them. The stakes were enormous. This was not just about embarrassment. It was about trust, loyalty, and the future of familial bonds that had already been strained by years of media scrutiny. The initial leak had set the tone, but the photos themselves created a new level of intensity. Observers immediately began analyzing every detail: the backgrounds, the lighting, the angles. Every small element became a potential clue. Who was present in each frame? What was unsaid? What intentions could be inferred from body language alone? The audience, public and private alike, found themselves drawn into a web of speculation. Even seasoned journalists admitted they had never seen reactions like this before. The photos didn't just tell a story, they demanded interpretation, and each interpretation had its own consequences. Meghan's response to the emerging scandal was carefully measured. Publicly, she maintained composure, her statements precise, her demeanor controlled. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. These images threatened not just her public image, but her personal security and her carefully constructed role within the royal narrative. She was acutely aware that any misstep could intensify the scandal and further erode the fragile alliances she had built over years. Every decision, every glance, every word now carried weight, and the scrutiny was relentless. Prince Andrew, already familiar with public criticism, faced renewed attention and analysis. His involvement, whether deliberate or circumstantial, placed him at the center of speculation. Every association with Meghan in the photos became a headline, a topic of debate, a piece of the scandalous puzzle. Observers dissected his posture, his gestures, and even the choice of attire, searching for hints of impropriety or confirmation of hidden narratives. Andrew, who had endured decades of public scrutiny, found himself navigating familiar territory but with stakes higher than ever before. The palace, predictably, moved quickly but cautiously. Crisis management teams were assembled, communication channels were scrutinized, and legal advisors were consulted. Security protocols were reevaluated. Meetings were held behind closed doors, where staff attempted to assess the damage and determine a strategy to contain the fallout. Yet, as with any leak of this magnitude, the velocity of modern information made containment nearly impossible. Every moment that passed allowed speculation to grow, and the palace realized it was fighting an uphill battle against time and technology. As the photos gained traction, the public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media exploded with commentary, analysis, and conjecture. News outlets scrambled to report, often adding layers of interpretation that fueled further debate. Public sentiment fractured. Some defended Meghan, emphasizing context and nuance, while others condemned the images outright. The viral nature of the photos created a feedback loop. More coverage generated more speculation, and more speculation fueled further outrage. But there was more to the photos than the public realized. Beyond the immediate shock, there were subtle hints and nuances that suggested complex dynamics at play. A fleeting glance, a gesture, a shared smile. Each detail became a focal point for interpretation. Analysts and insiders alike began piecing together timelines, questioning motives, and hypothesizing intentions. What was seemingly casual could be loaded with meaning, and the palace understood that perception would shape reality in the eyes of the public. Harry, caught in the maelstrom, struggled to process the implications. This was not simply a private betrayal. It was an event that would ripple through the royal family and into the broader cultural consciousness. Every decision he made now had potential consequences that extended far beyond personal relationships. He had to navigate a complex web of media scrutiny, family expectations, and his own emotional turmoil, all while maintaining the public face expected of a royal. The weight of the situation was immense, and each passing hour intensified the pressure. Meanwhile, the press began to uncover background information about Markus Anderson. His methods, motivations, and previous activities became subjects of intense investigation. Was he a rogue journalist? A palace insider? A person with a personal vendetta? Each theory gained traction, adding layers of intrigue to an already explosive situation. The world wanted answers, and every revelation seemed to open new questions, creating a continuous cycle of anticipation and suspense. What made the leak particularly destabilizing was the implication that there might be more. If these photos were just the beginning, what else could surface? The thought of additional, potentially more compromising material left the palace and the public on edge. The narrative had been set in motion, but its full trajectory remained uncertain. Every rumor, every hint, Every speculative report only added to the tension, creating an environment where truth and fiction intertwined in a complicated dance. Amid this chaos, one fact stood out: the power of a single image. In an age dominated by visual media, a photograph could do what words often failed to achieve. It could provoke outrage, evoke sympathy, and alter perception instantaneously. These photos weren't just evidence. They were instruments of influence, shaping public opinion, challenging authority, and exposing vulnerabilities in ways that traditional reporting could not. Observers, both inside and outside the palace, began noting patterns. Certain settings in the photos were familiar, suggesting private locations within royal estates. Certain gestures indicated closeness or familiarity, inviting speculation about the nature of the relationships depicted. And yet, despite intense scrutiny, many questions remained unanswered. Ambiguity fueled curiosity, and curiosity drove engagement. This was a scandal engineered for the digital age, where attention is currency and every unanswered question deepens engagement. Even as the first wave of analysis settled, the palace remained on high alert. Security teams monitored communications for leaks, potential threats, and unauthorized dissemination of additional materials. Legal teams prepared statements, balancing the need for privacy with the inevitability of public interest. Public relations strategists worked tirelessly to manage the narrative, aware that any misstep could magnify the fallout. Every move was calculated, but the unpredictability of the media landscape created a constant undercurrent of tension. Harry's emotional journey through this phase was intense. He oscillated between outrage, disbelief, and a desperate need to protect those he loved. Each new insight into the photos, each public reaction, intensified his feelings of betrayal. Trust, already fragile, was now fractured beyond recognition. He was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about loyalty, secrecy, and the lengths people might go to manipulate perception. Meanwhile, Meghan maintained her composure, carefully navigating the storm. Her public demeanor projected confidence and control, even as private communications indicated a high degree of concern and strategy. Every appearance, every statement, every social media post was scrutinized for hidden meaning. She understood that in the age of instant information, perception could be as powerful as reality. As for Prince Andrew, the photos reignited old controversies and cast a long shadow over past actions. Media outlets drew parallels to previous scandals, scrutinizing his role and interpreting his presence in the photos in ways that amplified the narrative. Public perception shifted, and once again, the complexities of image management, historical context, and accountability collided in the public eye. And yet, even amid the chaos, one element remained constant: the curiosity gap. Markus Anderson's leak had not revealed everything. Details, motivations, and context remained elusive. Every analysis, every speculation, every media report pointed to one uncomfortable truth: the story was far from complete. And as observers around the world watched, they were left with a lingering question: what else was hidden, waiting to surface? The palace braced for the next phase, but no one could predict the full extent of the fallout. The photos had set the stage, but the drama, intrigue, and revelations were only beginning. As the world digested the first wave of information, one fact became undeniable: nothing about this scandal was ordinary. Every revelation, every interpretation, every reaction had the potential to reshape the narrative entirely. And just as the first shock began to settle, whispers of a particularly revealing detail emerged, something that would make Harry, Meghan, and Andrew reconsider everything they thought they knew about trust, loyalty, and exposure. The moment Harry saw the photos, something inside him shifted. It was more than shock. It was a visceral, gut-wrenching realization that the walls he had built around himself, walls designed to protect his family, his reputation, and his own emotional stability, had been breached. The leak wasn't just about images on a screen. It was about trust, betrayal, and a sense of personal violation that cut deeper than any tabloid headline ever could. He stared at the first photo in disbelief, each second stretching longer than the last. The familiarity of the palace estates in the background, the subtle gestures between Meghan and Andrew, the candid expressions. Everything felt like a puzzle, and every piece seemed to scream a betrayal he hadn't anticipated. How could someone so close to him be implicated in this chaos? How could the world now see what he had long feared might remain hidden? Harry's mind raced. He recalled private conversations, moments he thought were secure, exchanges that he believed were shielded from the public eye. Each memory now seemed tainted, each trust questioned. The intensity of the breach left him numb, and yet, beneath the shock, a burning anger began to take root. He didn't just feel betrayed, he felt powerless. The palace's walls, both literal and metaphorical, had failed to protect him, and the world was watching. The first instinct was to react immediately, to confront, to demand answers, to protect what he still could. But in the digital age, reactions carry consequences far beyond the moment. Every post, every public statement, every action could be dissected, misinterpreted, and weaponized. Harry understood this. He had grown up under the relentless scrutiny of cameras, microphones, and paparazzi lenses. Every expression, every gesture, every misstep was a story waiting to be told. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for a betrayal of this magnitude, one orchestrated by someone so calculated, so deliberate, that the rules of privacy seemed meaningless. In the quiet of his private quarters, Harry paced. He felt the weight of legacy pressing down on him, the expectations of monarchy, and the invisible chains of familial duty. Each photo was a reminder that even the most controlled environments could be breached. Even the most carefully guarded secrets could explode into public consciousness in an instant. And the emotional toll was relentless. Anger gave way to a sense of responsibility. If the leak had happened, he had to act. Not impulsively, not recklessly, but strategically. Every move he made would ripple outward, affecting Meghan, Andrew, the palace, and the public. He needed allies, counsel, and clarity. And yet, amid the strategizing, the personal emotions refused to be silenced. The betrayal cut deep. As he processed the images, memories of previous confrontations with the media surfaced. The endless cycles of rumor, speculation, and misrepresentation had prepared him to handle scrutiny, but not personal betrayal magnified for public consumption. Here, the intimacy of private life collided violently with the scrutiny of the global stage. And the collision left him raw, exposed, and searching for a foothold in a reality that no one else could fully understand. Harry's initial response was private and instinctive. He reached out to trusted aides, those who had stood by him during previous crises, to understand the scope of the leak. Every phone call, every secure message, carried urgency. The palace's internal communication channels were buzzing with tension, the gravity of the situation evident in every whispered update and hurried meeting. But even as he sought information, the images themselves lingered, etched in his mind, impossible to ignore. The psychological impact was profound. Harry, trained from childhood to embody poise and composure, now confronted the raw human emotions of shock, anger, and betrayal. Sleep eluded him. He replayed each moment, each detail, each expression. Questions consumed him. Could this have been prevented? Was Markus Anderson acting alone? What would the public conclude? And, most painfully, what did this reveal about the people he had trusted most? Despite the turmoil, Harry was aware that public perception mattered. The world would judge not only the actions of Meghan and Andrew, but also his response. Every word, every gesture, every visible reaction would be scrutinized. In this high-stakes environment, the personal and the public were inseparable. He needed to navigate the intersection carefully, balancing emotion with strategy, instinct with prudence. As the hours passed, Harry's circle of confidants grew more involved. Legal advisors, communication specialists, and family members offered counsel, yet even the most seasoned experts could not provide certainty. The images were undeniable. The leak was real, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Each decision, each action, was weighed not just for its immediate impact, but for the ripples it would create across the media landscape and within the royal family. The emotional toll was matched by strategic considerations. Harry knew that every revelation could be amplified, every interpretation debated. The first photo had already sparked global outrage, and it was only a matter of time before additional context or misinformation would enter the conversation. Anticipating the next moves became a mental chess game, each step requiring calculation, foresight, and, above all, control over emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. Despite the intensity, Harry was determined. This was more than personal indignation. It was a defense of family, integrity, and the very principles he had been raised to uphold. He resolved to act decisively, to navigate the storm with clarity, and to protect those who were vulnerable in this maelstrom. Yet, he could not ignore the lingering pain, the sense that trust, once shattered, could never be fully restored. Meanwhile, the palace walls, though fortified by tradition and protocol, could not shield him from the relentless exposure of modern media. Every conversation, every report, every analysis added pressure, amplifying the emotional impact of the photos. And as he absorbed the reality of the situation, one truth became unavoidable. This was not a private matter anymore. The leak had transformed personal betrayal into a public spectacle, and Harry, whether he liked it or not, was at the center of it. But amid the shock, a new awareness emerged. The photos were not the final act. They were the opening chapter. There were deeper implications, unseen consequences, and further revelations that could surface at any moment. The need for vigilance, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience had never been more acute. Harry realized that navigating this scandal would require not just reaction but anticipation, not just emotional intelligence but tactical acumen. And then came the first sign that the storm was far from over. Whispers reached him of additional materials, more images, and private communications that Markus Anderson might release. The threat was immediate, tangible, and unavoidable. Every heartbeat, every breath, carried the weight of anticipation. Harry understood that the initial shock was only the beginning, and that what followed could redefine not just personal relationships, but public perception, legacy, and the stability of the royal family itself. In that moment, Harry faced a stark reality. The photos had ignited a chain reaction. Trust was fractured, perceptions were shifting, and the palace's carefully constructed image was under siege. He could not undo what had happened, and yet he had to respond. Every choice mattered. Every silence, every statement, every gesture would ripple outward, carrying consequences far beyond the immediate moment. And as the first wave of anger and disbelief began to subside, a deeper, more dangerous question emerged. Who else knew? Who else had access to these materials? And most importantly, what would Markus Anderson do next? While Harry grappled with shock, anger, and a sense of betrayal, Meghan Markle was navigating a labyrinth of emotions and strategic calculations that few could ever fully understand. The leak had placed her squarely under the global microscope, and yet, unlike Harry, Meghan had long developed the art of managing attention, expectation, and narrative in ways that were subtle but powerful. Every glance, every movement, every carefully chosen word was scrutinized, not just by the media, but by the public, the palace, and, crucially, by her adversaries. From the very moment she learned that Markus Anderson had leaked the photos, Meghan's reaction was measured. There was anger, of course, a sharp sting of betrayal and vulnerability, but it was wrapped in layers of calculated composure. This was a woman who had learned, through experience and circumstance, that public perception could be as critical as the truth itself. She understood that in the digital age, image and narrative were inseparable, and that every reaction carried both risk and opportunity. The first challenge she faced was immediate: control the narrative. The palace's internal communications were buzzing, legal teams were mobilized, and PR advisors were preparing statements. But none of it could entirely shield her from the torrent of public scrutiny. The images had already gone viral. Social media exploded with speculation. News outlets around the world dissected every detail of the photos, and the commentary ranged from the sympathetic to the scathing, the rational to the outright sensational. Meghan had to navigate all of it in real time, balancing personal emotions with the imperatives of strategy and image management. But beneath the surface, Meghan was also processing the personal implications of the leak. The photos, while perhaps ambiguous to outsiders, held intimate details, private moments, and gestures that were deeply personal. The exposure of these moments violated not only her privacy, but also her sense of agency. It was one thing to be criticized by the public. It was another to have private interactions weaponized and displayed for global judgment. The emotional weight was immense. Meghan's strategic approach was multifaceted. Publicly, she maintained composure, ensuring that her demeanor conveyed strength, dignity, and control. She appeared calm, collected, and confident, someone unshaken by external chaos. Privately, however, she worked tirelessly to assess the situation, understand the motivations behind Markus Anderson's actions, and prepare for every conceivable outcome. Every statement, every appearance, and every interaction was calibrated to manage perception without inflaming the situation further. Allies within her circle played crucial roles. Advisors, confidants, and trusted friends provided information, guidance, and reassurance. They analyzed the leaked photos, contextualized them, and brainstormed strategies to mitigate potential damage. The goal was not only to protect Meghan's reputation, but also to ensure that Harry, the broader family, and the public understood the nuances that the images alone could not convey. At the same time, Meghan faced the emotional challenge of isolation. In moments of intense scrutiny, when the world's gaze is both unforgiving and unrelenting, even those surrounded by advisors can feel profoundly alone. Trust becomes a scarce resource. Every word spoken, every action taken, is filtered through lenses of judgment and speculation. Meghan had to navigate these waters while maintaining her composure and ensuring that no reaction, however human or understandable, could be misinterpreted or weaponized. The photos themselves presented a unique challenge. While they were undeniably compelling, they were also incomplete. Context was missing. Intentions were obscured. Ambiguity was rampant. Meghan understood this implicitly. She recognized that public opinion could be swayed by the smallest cues, by the slightest insinuation. And in the absence of context, speculation would dominate. Her strategy, therefore, was to regain control of the narrative before misinformation solidified into public belief. One particularly difficult aspect was anticipating Harry's reaction. Meghan knew the depth of his emotional investment, his protective instincts, and his tendency to act decisively in moments of personal betrayal. She also understood that the images would likely evoke a profound emotional response, one that could complicate both her public strategy and their private relationship. Managing the intersection of their personal dynamics with the public fallout became an immediate and pressing concern. In parallel, Meghan had to contend with the media landscape itself. Tabloids thrived on sensationalism. Social media amplified outrage. News cycles moved at a pace that was both relentless and unforgiving. Every detail of the leak was magnified, every rumor examined, every interpretation debated. In this environment, Meghan's challenge was not just damage control. It was proactive management of perception, ensuring that she remained a credible, dignified, and resilient figure amid unprecedented scrutiny. Despite the intensity of the moment, Meghan also demonstrated remarkable psychological acuity. She recognized that the leak was part of a larger pattern of intrusion, exposure, and manipulation that had long affected her and her family. This perspective allowed her to approach the situation not merely as a crisis to survive, but as a strategic challenge to navigate, one that required foresight, composure, and adaptability. Amid all of this, Meghan also faced the emotional toll of isolation and betrayal. The photos were not merely public artifacts. They were private moments turned into instruments of scrutiny and judgment. The personal impact was profound. Every decision she made, every calculated expression she offered to the world, carried layers of emotion, frustration, fear, anger, and determination. She was acutely aware that the stakes extended beyond personal reputation. They touched relationships, family dynamics, and the broader royal institution. The leaked photos also revealed subtle dynamics that were previously hidden. The images suggested connections, interactions, and nuances that could easily be misinterpreted or sensationalized. Meghan understood that the public would construct narratives from fragments, and that these narratives could be both flattering and damning, often simultaneously. Managing the ambiguity became a critical aspect of her strategy. At the same time, Meghan anticipated that the fallout would not be linear. Scandals of this magnitude rarely are. Reactions would unfold over days, weeks, and months. Initial outrage would give way to deeper analysis. Misinformation would emerge, requiring correction. The palace's response, her own communications, and the evolving media landscape would interact in unpredictable ways, amplifying the emotional and strategic stakes. Even within this maelstrom, Meghan maintained her composure. She met with advisors, reviewed the photos meticulously, and began to formulate a multi-layered strategy. She anticipated potential leaks, misinformation, and further scrutiny. She prepared for public appearances, media interviews, and private discussions, all while managing her own emotional response to betrayal and exposure. Yet, despite this careful planning, uncertainty remained. Markus Anderson's motives were unclear. The extent of the leak was unknown. Additional photos, communications, or revelations could emerge at any moment. Meghan understood that the first wave of exposure was merely the beginning, and that navigating the unfolding crisis would require continuous attention, adaptation, and emotional resilience. And as she prepared for the inevitable next steps, one chilling realization emerged. The leak had set a stage for further revelations that could challenge not only her reputation, but also the stability of her relationship with Harry, her standing within the royal family, and her ability to influence the narrative surrounding the events. Every choice mattered. Every move carried consequences, and every reaction was scrutinized by a global audience hungry for drama, scandal, and revelation. While Harry wrestled with shock and Meghan navigated strategy, Prince Andrew found himself at the epicenter of a storm he hadn't anticipated but couldn't escape. The leaked photos cast him in a spotlight that was simultaneously scrutinizing and unforgiving, reigniting past controversies and thrusting him into a scandal that seemed to blend the personal, the political, and the deeply private. For Andrew, this was not a simple crisis. It was a reckoning. The moment the first image circulated, Andrew's world shifted. The public, conditioned by years of media narratives surrounding him, immediately latched onto his presence in the photos. Every gesture, every glance, every subtle expression became fodder for analysis. Unlike Harry, whose reactions were personal and emotional, Andrew faced a unique challenge: the dual pressure of defending himself while contending with decades of accumulated public perception. One misstep could, and likely would, be amplified across the globe. Andrew's initial reaction was a mixture of incredulity and calculated assessment. He recognized immediately that the leak was more than just a breach of privacy. It was a strategic blow. Markus Anderson had exposed him in a way that intertwined personal behavior with public perception, a combination that magnified the impact exponentially. Every action he had taken in private was now subject to interpretation, and every historical controversy he had endured was suddenly reframed through the lens of this scandal. But the complexity of Andrew's position went beyond public perception. Within the palace, his role had always been a delicate balance between duty, discretion, and influence. The photos disrupted that balance. They forced him into reactive modes that contradicted both his personal instincts and the carefully maintained facade of royal composure. Where he once operated with relative predictability, he now faced an unpredictable chain reaction of scrutiny, speculation, and judgment. The leak also reignited conversations about Andrew's past controversies. The public memory of prior scandals, whether directly related or tangentially connected, resurfaced with renewed intensity. Analysts, journalists, and commentators began drawing lines between past accusations and current implications, creating a narrative that framed Andrew not just as a participant in a new scandal, but as someone whose history suggested a pattern of questionable behavior. The convergence of old and new allegations created a perfect storm of reputational risk. Behind the palace walls, Andrew's internal response was more nuanced than the public could perceive. He was aware of the stakes, not just for himself, but for the broader royal family. The leak implicated not only him, but also Meghan and Harry, intertwining their narratives in ways that complicated traditional channels of response and reconciliation. Every private meeting, every advisory session, every moment of reflection carried immense weight. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, or miscalculation could escalate the situation into irreversible territory. Complicating matters further was the nature of the photos themselves. Unlike typical scandalous imagery, these were not sensationalized or overtly compromising in a superficial sense. They captured subtle moments, gestures, glances, and context that suggested deeper interpersonal dynamics. For Andrew, interpreting these images required navigating ambiguity, understanding perception, and anticipating both public and private reactions. Every detail, however minor, had potential ramifications. In his private reflections, Andrew grappled with guilt, defensiveness, and an acute awareness of the implications for his legacy. He recognized that the leak not only threatened immediate reputation, but also had the potential to reshape the narrative surrounding his life, actions, and decisions. In the eyes of the public, in the context of a scrutinizing media landscape, the nuances could be lost entirely. Misinterpretation was inevitable, and he had to strategize accordingly. The palace's response to Andrew's involvement was both protective and cautious. Senior advisors sought to shield him from additional exposure while simultaneously controlling the narrative to prevent escalation. Legal teams evaluated potential breaches, PR specialists prepared messaging frameworks, and internal communications sought to contain speculation. Yet, despite these measures, Andrew understood that containment was only partially possible. Once the leak had entered the public sphere, momentum was unstoppable. Andrew's relationship with Meghan added another layer of complexity. The photos suggested familiarity and interactions that invited interpretation beyond the literal. Public perception could easily conflate innocuous behavior with impropriety, creating a narrative that neither reflected reality nor accounted for context. Navigating this delicate balance required subtlety, awareness, and strategic foresight. Qualities Andrew would need in abundance in the days and weeks to come. As the scandal developed, Andrew began to recognize that Markus Anderson's motives might have been strategic rather than purely malicious. The selection, timing, and framing of the photos suggested deliberate intent to maximize impact. For Andrew, understanding the architect behind the leak became as critical as managing the fallout itself. He had to anticipate future disclosures, potential narratives, and the way public sentiment might shift with each new revelation. Even amidst the strategy, however, emotions ran high. The intrusion into private life, the sudden shift in perception, and the intertwining of personal and public crises created psychological pressure. Andrew, often criticized for detachment or composure, now faced raw scrutiny that demanded emotional engagement, tactical calculation, and rapid decision-making. The stakes were high, and the room for error minimal. The implications extended beyond personal reputation. The leak had triggered a chain reaction affecting Harry, Meghan, and the wider royal family. Allies and advisors had to coordinate carefully to ensure that individual actions did not conflict, that statements remained consistent, and that the broader narrative could be managed across multiple fronts. Andrew's role, previously contained and relatively stable, had become a pivot point in a scandal that threatened to redefine family dynamics and public perception. Media coverage intensified. Analysts dissected Andrew's gestures, expressions, and body language in the leaked photos. Opinion columns debated motivations, intentions, and moral implications. Social media commentary ranged from outrage to sympathy, creating a cacophony of voices that influenced public perception and pressured the palace to respond with precision. Andrew, already familiar with scrutiny, now faced a concentrated wave that tested both resilience and strategy. As the days unfolded, whispers of additional leaks or contextual revelations emerged. Markus Anderson's actions suggested the possibility of further disclosures, each with the potential to compound the situation. Andrew understood that each image, each interpretation, each reaction could alter the trajectory of the scandal, and he prepared accordingly. Every decision, whether public or private, was weighed for its potential ripple effects. The deeper Andrew delved into managing the crisis, the more he realized the complexity of the situation. It wasn't merely about defending his own reputation. It was about navigating intertwined relationships, controlling the flow of information, and anticipating the reactions of a global audience attuned to scandal. Every choice mattered. Every misstep could amplify consequences exponentially. Yet, even amidst the strategic considerations, Andrew faced an undeniable truth. The photos had shifted the landscape irrevocably. Trust had been compromised, perception had been altered, and the palace could no longer control the narrative entirely. The leak had created a cascade of consequences that would continue to unfold, revealing not only hidden dynamics, but also the vulnerabilities inherent in power, image, and familial relationships. And then came the first hint of a revelation that would push Andrew to a breaking point. An insight within the photos themselves, subtle yet undeniable, that suggested motivations, alliances, and secrets far deeper than anyone had anticipated. It was a detail that would force him to confront not only his own role, but also the broader implications for Meghan, Harry, and the palace itself. The palace, often portrayed as a bastion of composure and control, was anything but calm in the wake of Markus Anderson's leak. As the photos of Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew spread across the globe, the royal family found themselves grappling with a crisis that was at once intensely personal and explosively public. Each member reacted differently, shaped by personality, history, and the weight of expectation, yet all faced the same undeniable reality. The leak had shattered the carefully maintained illusion of privacy. At first, there was disbelief. Advisors whispered updates in hushed tones. Courtiers exchanged anxious glances. Senior family members convened in private chambers to assess the situation. The images were more than scandalous. They were symbolic. They represented a breach not only of privacy, but also of trust, loyalty, and the centuries-old codes that governed royal life. For a family accustomed to secrecy and discretion, this public exposure was unprecedented. Queen Elizabeth, the figurehead of centuries of tradition, faced the situation with measured calm. Publicly, her statements were brief, carefully worded, and devoid of unnecessary emotion. Privately, however, she convened trusted advisors to determine the scope of the crisis and to plan a response. Every detail mattered: media reactions, public sentiment, legal ramifications, and the potential for further leaks. Her experience navigating past scandals was invaluable, but even she recognized the unique challenge posed by the immediacy and viral nature of modern media. Prince Charles, as heir apparent, had his own set of concerns. Beyond familial loyalty, he understood the broader implications for the monarchy's image. Each photo, each allegation, each public reaction had the potential to erode the institution's credibility. For Charles, managing perception was as critical as addressing the internal fallout. He engaged in strategic discussions with advisors, emphasizing containment, measured communication, and careful framing of public statements. Yet, he also had to navigate personal dynamics, particularly Harry and Meghan's reactions, which added layers of emotional complexity to his decision-making. Other family members responded in ways that reflected their personal styles and histories. Some expressed outrage and demanded accountability. Others sought to protect relationships and minimize conflict. The leak created fissures within the family, exposing old grievances and tensions that had long remained unspoken. Every conversation, every meeting, every private discussion was now imbued with heightened stakes, as members struggled to balance loyalty, perception, and personal emotion. Harry, still reeling from the initial shock, began communicating more deliberately with his family. His anger was tempered by strategy, and he worked to understand not only the implications of the photos, but also the broader context in which they had surfaced. Meghan, equally focused, coordinated with him to ensure a unified approach, balancing emotional authenticity with public composure. Together, they became the focal point of both internal discussions and external media attention, their actions shaping the narrative in ways that reverberated throughout the palace. Meanwhile, Prince Andrew faced scrutiny not only from the public, but also from within the family. The leak forced him to confront uncomfortable truths, reevaluate alliances, and consider the potential consequences for his relationships with other members. His responses, measured yet cautious, reflected a deep awareness of the delicate balance between personal preservation and familial obligation. Every statement, every gesture, every meeting was carefully calibrated to manage perception while addressing the internal fallout. The royal advisors, legal experts, communication strategists, and security personnel worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Crisis management protocols were activated, social media channels were monitored for emerging narratives, and potential leaks were investigated. Every possible angle was considered: additional photos, unauthorized disclosures, and the likelihood of speculation escalating into misinformation. The palace faced an environment in which control was partial at best, and the speed of information dissemination made reactive strategies almost immediately outdated. Public perception became a critical focus. Polling data, social media sentiment analysis, and media coverage provided continuous feedback on how the scandal was being received. Each member of the royal family understood that public opinion was not static. It could shift dramatically in response to new revelations, statements, or even nonverbal cues during appearances. Maintaining credibility, authority, and emotional resonance became an intricate balancing act, requiring constant vigilance and adaptive strategy. Family meetings were tense, often strained, and sometimes emotionally charged. Discussions revolved around how to address the leak, manage media narratives, and support Harry, Meghan, and Andrew. Conflicting opinions emerged. Some advocated for immediate public statements. Others urged discretion and silence. The pressure was immense, as every decision had potential repercussions, not just for the immediate scandal, but for the institution's long-term reputation. One particularly critical aspect of the royal family's reaction was the focus on damage control. Internal communications emphasized the importance of consistency, the need to correct misinformation quickly, and the necessity of maintaining appearances of unity. Every interaction, public or private, was scrutinized, rehearsed, and evaluated. Advisors understood that any perceived division or inconsistency could exacerbate the situation, creating additional fodder for the media and the public. At the same time, emotional support became essential. Family members relied on trusted confidants, counselors, and private conversations to process the psychological weight of the leak. The intersection of personal betrayal, public scrutiny, and institutional responsibility created unprecedented stress, challenging even the most resilient members. Coping strategies varied. Some found solace in private reflection, others in dialogue with advisors, and some in the disciplined routines of royal duties. As the days progressed, the palace began to implement a phased response. Public statements were crafted to reaffirm dignity, discretion, and composure, while subtly reinforcing loyalty and continuity. Strategic communications aimed to control the narrative, highlighting facts while minimizing speculation. Internal protocols focused on security, information monitoring, and contingency planning for potential further leaks. Every element was designed to maintain stability and credibility in the face of unprecedented exposure. Yet, despite these measures, one reality remained inescapable. Markus Anderson had disrupted centuries of tradition, hierarchy,